Hey, welcome to another Thursday session. Today, the topic is going to be make your Revit annotations stick. What happened is that in the previous one, what we have is that we have focus group on Monday, but I find that sometimes it's much better to do it midweek or end of the week so that I could record it, process it on the weekend, and then have the video available on Monday. All right, sounds good. But if the thing is that it keeps changing because sometimes the room gets booked up. So I'm trying to be as flexible as possible, just work within everybody's time. But it's going to be every 2 weeks sort of a thing. So this is going to be a regular occurrence. And if people are missing this session, that's okay. I'm going to repeat it in the future because this is kind of like ongoing kind of a session. All right. When it comes to Revit annotations, everybody has this love-hate relationship. Sometimes annotation works, sometimes annotation just doesn't want to show, sometimes it just got missing, and everybody just pull their hair. And sometimes what happens that annotation works when nobody asks you to change anything, to say leave it as it is. Sometimes what happens with annotations is that whenever you change anything model related, what happens is that client keeps asking you to change this. You can never keep track of your annotations. Okay, that's the problem that Revit's having, unfortunately, but you can minimize that. Okay, now a lot of time this is kind of like a sample what Revit can do. Okay, you have Revit elements, you get model elements, datum elements, and view specific. So what I want to do is that today we're just going to describe how do you embed certain annotations into the model elements so that you don't have to do a lot of stuff. All right, so what happens is that this is kind of like how Revit does their thing. Okay, you have your model stuff, and then you have view specific and datum. And what happens is that model and annotations are two separate objects. There's always like that. Okay, that's how they design it. So model will show up in all views. Annotations only view dependence. Okay, you kind of understood that. Everybody understood how that's work. But for the Revit user, most of the time is that we have no time to check for missing annotations. You all know that a lot of projects, when we work on projects, we have to rush, right? So annotation is always going to be, when someone tag it, they tag it once and then they just go away, and then next time, you don't have to go back there and check it, right? But sometimes you have to, but most of the time we don't do a lot of that stuff. And this is the worst thing, right? We do all tagging. Sometimes what happens is that people accidentally right-clicking and then delete the page. It happens, right? So what happens is that you have to redo all the tags. That's the unfortunate things. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to demonstrating how to basically take the annotations and embed it into the model itself. So what happens is that whenever you have like a family itself, it will report back those information. The tag will always be there, okay? Now, this will only works if you are in the component families. It would not work if you have in a system family. Sure. Okay, so here it says that it only works for certain things. It would not work with system families like walls, roof, floor, ceilings. I wish it can, but unfortunately it only will work with doors, windows, curtain walls, panels, anything that's user created. Now the other thing you have to think about is that this embedded information, the embedded annotations, will not show up in elevation sections, only show up on plan. Okay, and tag will not stay horizontally by default. So sometimes what happens is that if you have an object that you rotate 45 degrees, sometimes that object wants to rotate with that component. Okay, just be aware of that. So hopefully today's learning outcome, what we want to demonstrate is that you want to do it less retagging. Like that's the benefit, right? So we don't want to retag all the time. We want the model object to kind of display what it is, and we don't have to do a lot of the stuff. All right, let's do a demo. Okay, let's do one for a live demo project. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm just going to create a new project. So I'm just going to go to the north elevation. Let's say, for example, you have a tower. I'm just going to array this. Okay, let's say there's 12 levels there. Now, what happens with that 12 level is, let's say you create a, come on, move this over there. Create a site, okay? So what happens with the property line? Let's say I'm going to create a sketch. Let's say I'm going to do a funky little, let's say that's my property line. Now, what happens is that when you want to do annotations, what you have to do is that you kind of have to type in property line, correct? That's how we typically do it. Now, the problem with this is that if you go to the next level, that information is not there. So what you have to do is that you have to copy this information and paste it up into the next level. Now, how do you solve this issue? Let's say you want to put that annotation there. And the other thing is that when you duplicate this particular view, let's say duplicate, you notice that that annotation disappears. Okay? So how do we overcome that? So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a family. All right? I'm just going to do this very quickly.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? So
sure.
We can just duplicate with detailing.
You can. You can duplicate with detailing.
Easy.
Yes, that's the easiest and peasy. But the problem with the duplicated detailing is that every annotation in there means that you duplicate those information, and that information becomes adding more memory into Revit. Okay, something to keep in mind, because every time when you make a duplicate, any annotations, anything information, means that it's double the size.
Does that mean that if we change that, like if we say property line and then we delete some word in that text,
That's
is
correct.
that change in both? No.
No, it will not change.
It becomes two objects.
That's correct. It's a separate object. Every time you do duplicate with detailing, it's a separate thing.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a view dependent. That's the unfortunate thing. You cannot do anything. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object. Okay, I'm going to create one called the generic.
So the reason you're doing all this is to save memory? That's the only thing?
Well, the thing is that we want to kind of stop people from like duplicating and then forget about, updating this information and updating multiple locations. So what this does is that I'm creating a family that basically when you put one in one location, it appears in the other location. And what happens is that when you start modifying this, it will update the other part. Okay, that's the whole point. Okay, so here I'm just going to create a simple one. All right, here I'm just going to call it a name. I'm going to put it as an instance parameter and just call it a text. Okay, and just add that in. Doesn't have to be anything, just the name. Oops. Sizing doesn't matter. Just use the correct size. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create another family. This is an annotation family. The next family I'm going to create is any families, right? Model families. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put it under. It's called the site. All right, site information. So what I'm going to do in here is that I'm going to basically take that family 4 and just load it into family 5. Okay, right now what it does is that it's give me a question mark. Now in here I could say click on this and you can say I want to attach it to type comments, for instance. Okay, you could create your own whatever. If you want to have, like, let's say a share parameter that you can actually schedule, you can actually say make it to that. Now the next thing I want to do with this is that I'm going to create a model line. Okay, just like to tell me where that object is supposed to be. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create one that's that. Make it more of invisible line so that they don't show up. And then the other thing I would want to do with this is that I want to create one that's called the projection height. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a line. Okay, give it like 2 meters, for instance. And in here, I'm just going to say height. Projection height. Projection height. Okay. In an instance, I'm just going to put an instance parameter. I'm just going to hide this temporarily so that whenever you draw a model line, I'm just going to use an invisible line. Just put it there and there. So what you end up having is that it's just that little circle tells you where is it in plan, and then that height elevation is basically where it's going to cut. I'm not going to save this, so I'm just going to just load it into the project. Okay. So let's say right now I'm going to put it here. Okay. Now what you could do is that you could just click on this and say this is a property line, right? Okay, looks like that. Now what happens is that in level 2 doesn't have anything. So now the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm just going to change the height to, let's say, 5 meters. Okay, and now what happens is that in level 2, that object starts to appear. Now when you start duplicating this particular object, you see that that object actually becomes part of the object. Okay, you can just change the scale. Okay, the nice thing about this is that it follows the annotations. So what I'm basically doing is that I'm embedding those objects inside that particular one. Okay, so this one is kind of useful if you're doing like any labels and stuff like that. And then rather than, let's say you have a multiple level, I'm just going to go view. All right, I'm just going to go plan, floor plan, and say, you know, from here to there. Reality-wise, you do not want to go into every level and dimension every, like, basically call out everything. So what you want to do is that you want to take that, that's a site label, that is a model object with an annotation that's embedded within that object. So here you could say, okay, I want to make it 100 meters. Okay, so that every level will show up. So you have one object representing everything. Okay, so if you are doing, let's say, elevator, yeah, you want to mention what is the elevator number for this and elevator number for that, rather than doing it for one individual level. This one you just say put it in that label and then say project it up, let's say 200 feet up, you know, your elevator run, then that text will appear everywhere. Okay, does that sound nice? Pretty good? All right, let's go a little bit more deeper. All right, in one scenario, I'm just going to use the live project now. Okay, this is a Brecken project. Some of you guys may know or may not know. This project is basically somewhere in Nanaimo. And what happened is that I'm always seeing where people added in this SM. And the problem with that is that it's just a text. Okay, how do you embed that information in there? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go edit that. Okay, let's say that is your information object. So what I'm going to do with this is that I'm going to take that family 4, okay, just put a name, 3 meters fine, and I'm just going to put it under the parking space. Okay, in here I'm going to tie it into something. Okay, you could be a model number, could be description, could be anything. Okay, so now I'm just going to put it under model room. Okay, and the other thing I'm going to do with this is that I'm going to make that invisible so that it doesn't show up everywhere until I tell it to show up. So in here I'm just going to say this is a text, show text. Now for this particular one, I'm just going to go from here. I'm just going to say text offset. Okay, so you can adjust that, that's fine. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to align it to that and align it to that particular one. Okay, so now what you have that. And in here you could always rename it back. Let's say for example you haven't renamed the family. So you can always go back in here and say that this is going to be annotation text. And the same thing I would do with the same family 4, just say text. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load it back in, okay, to the bracket. And say yes. You're not going to see it first until you invoke it to say show up. Okay, now I'm going to do is that I'm going to take this small car and then I'm going to say show the text, and for model I'm just going to say small. And then what happened is that, there we go. So you can get rid of this. So now all the small, okay, any car with small, let's say this one, same thing. you just call it and invoke it. Okay, say this is show text, and then I'm just gonna put in model SM, for instance. There we go. Now the text itself, it's a very funny thing. If you want to make it kind of rotate correctly, the first thing you have to do is that you have to go to edit the type and go in here and say keep the text readable and rotate with component. Okay, that's the only trick you have to do, and then just say load it in here, override, and load it in and put it into the Brecken model. And say override. Now reset that. Okay, and then same thing. You could go in here and just change it for everybody to then just say SM. Okay, that's good. You see that right here? Yeah. So that's the power of it, right? So rather than typing in this small little text, which everybody does all the time, you can eliminate that now. So if you can have that and embed it into your stall like this, then you know what? You don't have to type in all this information. So this becomes irrelevant, okay? You want to avoid text as much as possible, all right? You want to avoid a lot of this texting because texting only appears in that particular view, okay? For Revit, you want it to be as much model as possible. So if I go to, let's say, P1 right here, you notice that that text also shows up, okay? So you place it once, you don't have to retag it all the time. Okay, any questions so far with this? No? Pretty self-explanatory? Okay, pretty easy, right? Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to go to the next one, sample families. In the past, what I did is that this was before. I'm not sure if you guys use Revit before where you cannot do dual units. That was like 2010, 2011. So what tends to happen is that you have to create two dimensions. One is the, one is imperial, the other one metric, and then you just basically have to move it. A lot of work. So what I did is that in my previous, how we resolve that issue is that we created one called the model manual dimensions. Now, the nicest thing about this, I'm just going to upgrade this model. This is like in 2012. So what it does is that it has the dimensions and has the value of 4 feet and 12, let's say, millimeters and meters. I'm going to use Brecken as kind of like the guinea pigs. Okay, the nicest thing about this is that you could put in that dimensions. Okay, I'm going to say architectural component. There's a model called the manual dimensions. All right, I'm just going to place it a work set. So the nicest thing about this is that when I put it here and then put it to, let's say I wanted to force it to there, it will report back that information based on that. Okay. If you go back to, let's say, other view, you notice that that information sticks right there. So it will not disappear. Okay? Nicest thing about this is that you could actually report back. Let's say this dimension, you want to say code. Let's say I want to go in and say this is going to be part of code checking. Okay? QA/QC, this is a very good way of interpreting, right? Just tell the guy saying that, okay, use this dimension if you want to do some code checking. And now what you could do is that I'm just going to do another one and just place it somewhere else. Let's say, for example, here to there. And then I'm just going to do just sample some of them. Okay, this is 22. And let's say, for example, this one, I'm just going to make it interpret, let's say this is 18 feet, 6 inches, for instance. Now, how do you do QA/QC on this? So the first thing I'm going to do, first I will have to know what dimension this is supposed to be. It's a furniture system. Okay. So now what I can do is that you can go to schedule. Okay, it's under furniture system, F, furniture system. The first thing I'm going to do is that I want the type comment, and then filter. I'm just going to say type comment equal code. Okay, and the next thing you want to do is that you want it to be setback length, I believe. Let's see. And say okay. And you notice that what it does is that it will mention where there what that is. And what you could do is that you could always create a schedule with a filter on it. So what the filter is that, let's say setback length, conditional formatting. If the setback length is less than, let's say for example in the code in Vancouver, let's say if it's less than 28 foot 8, give me a color red. Okay, that's my background. And then say okay. And notice that, you know, when you're doing a QA, QC, let's say you put all this dimensions and setback and stuff like that, and if anything that's mentioning if it's less than 21 foot 8, then give me a red. Then what you could do is that you could say, oh, this is a mistake. So let's say I'm going to go back and highlight the model, right? This is also a good way to kind of like, oops, where is it? This is also a good way to kind of say, okay, go back to that view, and then, you know, see where that particular object, where there's an issue. Okay? Any questions so far with this? This is how we do it, like in the past, if you want to do like QC, but I'm pretty sure that you guys will probably have to do this in some other projects when, let's say, travel distance code or something like that. If you run into that, just let me know, and then I'll create one. I think this one is also particularly useful if you're doing like travel distance. Okay? Think of it as a travel distance. I'm just using this as an example, just say, you know, that is the width of the aisle, right? If there is an issue, that will pop up.
Actually, that's an interesting one. The travel distance. Are you able to create a family that has? So the problem with travel distance in Revit is we draw them with detail lines, right? And
right.
You have to manually do a string measurement to determine its length.
That's right.
Are you saying that you can create a family that kind of has the ability to have multiple turns and still reports the overall length back?
Yes, you can.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. One of the things that you could do, I typically use, is called the handrail. Okay. If you do a handrail, let's say for example, I'm just basically creating like a handrail for, you know, travel distance. Let's say this is the distance, and let's say this is my second distance, kind of a thing, and say okay. And then let's say this one, just pretend that this is travel distance. I'm going to duplicate it, right? But the graphics, don't worry about the graphics. I'm going to probably do something with the graphics. So it looks like it's a dashed line, right? Bunch of dashed lines. And what happened with this is that if, let's say you have a travel distance, then you can say, okay, give me a schedule of that. So I'm going to go View, Schedule, and say Railing, R, okay? Railing schedule, and then the first thing I'm going to do is that, oh yeah, I forgot to do something. First I want to do is add information, okay? Always add a couple of information, say this is travel distance, all right? So all you have to do is just give it like a one particular name. This is type comment, and then now what you can do is that you can say, okay, and then say this is travel, oh, railing, all right? And then the first thing I'm going to do is that type comment, filter. Oh yeah, I forgot to add it in. Type comment, and filter equals travel distance. And in here, there is one called length. You notice that right here?
Yep.
I'm going to add that in. There we go. Okay?
Nice.
So you could do that. Okay, use railing, just say boo, 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 and then it will just follow whatever path you want. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
That's
a great one.
I can't believe we've been doing it that way all this time.
Yeah. But if it's a linear thing, like, yeah, we could create a family, just a linear line, right? But if you have like multiple jog like that, I would just say use a railing.
Yeah.
Well, and that would also follow 3D changes in the 3D surface.
That's correct, yes.
Oh.
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 Yeah, there we go.
If you click
I don't know if I
on
wanted
the
to.
run,
Yeah,
it will show you the
that
full
could
length
work against
of
it.
that one run, rather than looking in a table.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like Natasha here brought up a good question. Is that let's say you want to do a segment, right? It does not do segment; it just takes the whole thing as one calculation.
Right, but in the model, if you clicked on that railing, would it tell you the length of all the segments together, like one?
That's correct, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't necessarily need the table or the schedule to see the length.
Right. But you could also do a tag as well. So if you want to do a railing tag, let's say you want to know the distance and stuff like that, you can always, I think you can do a railing. Just says, this is off topic, but anyways. So you could create, let's say if you want to know the length of that, right? So I'm just going to use the generic annotation. Let's say I'm going to change this to railing, okay? And in here, there we go, there's a length. Okay, say that's my length. You can always add something, let's say this travel distance. Right? And then just make it like that, load it in, say Brecken. I'm gonna go back, and then what you can do now is that you can say annotate travel distance. There we go. So let's say if this thing ever change, let's say you add another segment. There we go. So there you go. So you don't have to, rely on, that old method of calculating, right? All right. Any questions so far with this? Pretty cool.
No, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. 30.
Coolest thing I've seen all day.
All right. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is that remember, like when you do BGs and all that stuff, what happens is that let's see. Let's go to this particular project. All right, so let's say, for example, if you want to do BGs, okay, so what tends to happen is that you have a floor.
Wait, what is it?
BG is building grade and stuff like that.
Oh, BG. Okay.
Yeah, BG, sorry. Okay, so let's say, for example, this is how we used to do it, right? All right, so the problem with this is that if this thing gets deleted, that whole thing gets deleted, okay? So what if you could actually keep this annotation as it is, even though that object can get deleted? Can you do that, right? Okay, so here I'm just gonna explain how that works, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a family, okay? Just generic annotation, doesn't have to be anything. Generic annotation, let's say I'm gonna create one, it's called height, elevation height. Okay, I'm just gonna create one. Length is fine, instance parameter. I'm gonna call this elevation height. And I'm gonna add in a couple values. One of them is gonna be the drop value, or you could say it's kind of like if you're taking, let's say, if you want your slab to cut it depress or go up, then this is kind of like a factor to add it in. Okay, let's say, for example, this one is going to be drop value. I'm just going to say that's the drop value. It's a length. And then the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm just going to create one. It's instance parameter again. It's going to be total elevation. Okay, that's just my number. And I'm going to say that's the total elevation. I'm just going to put that in right there. Top, left, and I'm just going to draw a circle so that it looks like an elevation marker. Okay, you all know this. So, total elevation. So what I'm going to do in here is that right now, let's say, assuming that the total elevation is 1,000 meters, the drop is, let's say, 100. And this one I'm going to say elevation plus drop value. So it's going to give me that value, okay? And I'm going to load this into the project 2. Okay, let's assume that this is the value. This is just a regular annotation, doesn't have anything. Now, how do you make this tie into this? Okay, you can do that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is that go to elevation. Okay, normally what I would do is that you would create a level. Okay, I would typically create one that is let's say this is my reference plane. I'm going to call this, let's say, sea level, I guess. This is what you guys use, right? And here I'm just going to move this up, let's say, that elevation. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to go create a dimension here, create a dimension here, create a dimension here, and then just keep repeating. Okay, I'm just going to go to, like, let's say level 5. I'm just going to create 5 level. So the next thing you can do with this is that you could actually add a label dimension. So let's say, for example, this is going to be level 1 elevation. Oh, before I do anything, oops, I forgot to do something. This one, I want to make sure that it's reporting, because what happens is that if that elevation changed, it wants to report back those information. So I'm just going to say this is going to be level 1 elevation. Okay, dimension, that's fine. Do the same thing. So let's say this is level 2. So I'm going to say this is reporting level 2 elevation. And then again, same thing, saying that this one is level 3 elevation. And then this one is going to be level 4, etc., etc. You could do this. Normally what I would do with this is that when you're starting out with, like, let's say a tower or building or something, start with like one elevation that has all your dimensions, and it has to reference to, let's say, sea level or elevation 0, actual true elevation 0. Then you could just say, what's the height of it. Let's say this is, what is this, level 4? Yeah, level 4 elevation. And then finally level 5. Okay, so now you have that. First thing I'm going to do with this, I'm going to go back here. The only value I'm going to change is that this elevation, I'm going to change it to type parameter. Okay, you'll see why. Okay, here I'm just going to load it back in. And I also should add in another parameter called level. Just get level name. Okay. Put in text, put it up, move it up, and break it. So what you have is that you have a level name plus total elevation. I'm going to load it in, project. Okay, that's what it looks like. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call this, I'm going to duplicate this, or rename this to say this is level 1. Okay, here I'm just going to say this is level 1. Now you notice that in this elevation I could say make that my elevation. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate this, copy. Let's say you have 5 levels. So here I'm just going to say, okay, duplicate this. Call this level 2. Make that level 2. And then say that one level 2 elevation, report. Okay, and then the same thing here. I would say duplicate level 3. And then tie it with level 3. And then same thing here. Duplicate level 4. You can do this as many levels you want. Okay, and then finally level 5. Okay, make that level 5. Okay, you can keep changing up and down. So right now what we're going to do is I'm going to go WT. Ooh, that's too much. All right, let's see, close it. And all right, so this is my elevation. Go WT. I should close out of my other stuff. No. I'm just going to do that. No. I should minimize some of this stuff. Sorry, I've been unorganized. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize all the stuff so you don't see it. Okay, so now what happens is that if I start doing this, let's say I'm going to start moving this up and down, you see that elevation changes. Okay, So what happened is that, move it down, elevation change. Now, get back to that drop, okay? So let's assume that this is a depression. So I want to say this is a 100 millimeter depression. So what happened is that if this picks up this level minus, like, let's say 100, it means that that thing is depressed by 100. Now, you can tie it into a lot of things. You can say drop value. You can say, like, for this one, I want to say, you can create a global parameter, okay? Let's assume that, I got a curb height. Let's say curb height, okay? Just give it a dimension. Oops, sorry, cancel. You could say create one and say this is my curb height. And then my curb height, I want it to be, let's say, a foot, okay? And then you could keep creating this and say this is going to be my, let's say, my drainage elevation. Okay, it's going to be length. Now, drainage, let's say, assuming that we're going to do -4 inches, okay, just typical. So what you could do is that, assuming that you have a drainage here, you can say that tie this into something. Okay, let's say I'm going to tie into the drainage height. You could set it up some sort of a global parameter, just saying, okay, intern, I already set up this global parameter. All you have to do is that you go in there and say, set this to this, set that to that. And if you're going to say, like, the tile is going to be this height, whatever, you can set that global parameter. So what happens is that annotation, you can say, just reference it to this, reference it to that. Okay? So when you do slab edges, this becomes very fast. Like, if you know that that drop is going to be 12 inches, you know that, just put it in that value. Okay? Any question? Why would you do this and not, like, basically put in this value? This value? The reason why is that this one requires you to reference to something. Okay? If that something gets deleted, you're hooped, right? Assuming that you have a backup, you can copy that information back in. But chances are, once that elevation gets deleted, that's it. You basically have to redo all that. Whereas if you do it with this, let's assume that you know that this is all level 1, right? Let's assume that I'm going to go copy this and go to level 2. And then all I have to do is just go paste in current value, change that to level 2. And then you know that that number is going to change. So assuming that you've done like a slab edge, you know that it's going to be typical. Let's say that the only differences is going to be the balcony is going to change slightly, ever so slightly. So you could actually do this and say copy, copy, copy. And then all you have to do is just change that family to whatever level. And then all of this number will automatically update. Okay? With all this value, everything connected.
So you could use this, for example, for roof slopes, and you don't want to model the roof slopes, and you could add just a formula that say, okay, if I have 2% slope, and then you could just enter the distance or whatever.
That's correct. Yes, you could do that too. Yes. So this is kind of like, it could be old school CAD drawings, right? So not everything has to be modeled, right? So you could actually use this as kind of like, showing information, make it like stick it together. And the nicest thing about this is that it basically will transfer over, right? So you could group this as well. So it doesn't have to be like, you can group this. Okay, group 1. And you can always copy that information up and up. So once it becomes part of the group, if let's say someone accidentally delete this view and you want to call it back, you'd always say, okay, my detail view, where is it? And just call it up and put it back in place. Okay, it's a good way to do it. The other way I usually do is that if you ever want to use, let's say, a dimension for certain things, what I typically like to do is that I like to do detail line. Let's assume that this is my detail line. You could do this, okay? And I always like to do angle. And you could take this and group them together. As long as you have like a reference, like a detail line as a reference, you can start grouping this. Let's say this is dimension. And what this does is that this allows you to basically go edit the group. If you have to add more, just go detail lines. Let's say my detail lines here, and all you have to do is just keep expanding on that detail line. So if you have like object that's repeating, a suite would be a perfect example, right? So what you do is that you do the set it up a framework, and then what you do is that you do dimension. And what you can do with this is that you can copy it and paste it with another unit. Okay, does that sound foreign? It's not foreign. It's just like this is how you manage to keep those information together, because you have a repeating element, and all you have to do is just set one up and then copy it multiple times. And if you change one, let's say assuming that this is a suite, and then let's say I'm going to copy this. If I change one in here, let's say for example this one changes. Let's say this is like that, right? So guess what happens to this? This also changed. So you basically cut down the number of retagging you have to do for other places. Because if you have a suite that is typical, you do it once, you copy it to other level, then what happens is that if you do it once, this thing gets replicated everywhere. It's a good kind of way to kind of manage, right? So you don't have to do a lot of tagging, you just have to do it once. Okay? Any question with this? No? Pretty good? Yeah, I forgot to mention that you could also do door tags. Like if you're too lazy, like I don't want to do tagging. Let's say for example I hate tagging doors. Let's say for example this is my door, and do I have a door tag in here? Let's say tag. Okay, let's assume that you want to embed this tag into here. I'm too lazy. Okay, so the first thing you do is that you go edit this, and then I would change this to, let's say, generic annotation. Okay, that's the first thing you do. So if you saw a tag, and then you want to use like an override or anything that you could put inside that thing, the first thing you do is that you just call up this little guy here, and put it all to generic annotation. And in here, I'm just going to just put a label and say this is, it could be anything. So I'm just going to say text, or it could be a number, it could be a mark, or whatever. Mark is an integer, so you could say that one I wanted an integer, call the mark, call their same name, but I just say door number. Okay. And then just put it in here. Okay, that's my door number. Now, next thing you want to do is that you want to go back to that project and say, I want to add that information into this door. Okay, let's say this is a door. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the door tag and just say load it into my door, single flush. Okay, just put it in there. Okay, for location wise, make sure that you lock it in between the information, or else this it's going to keep jumping. So what I would do is that I would just say, if you have the annotation, just try to lock it into a line. But this one in particular doesn't like that. Okay, anyways, I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now, this one I'm going to tie it in. Okay, you can say door number. Okay, let's say this is a mark. Okay, let's say this is an instance parameter. Now, if you have a share parameter, you can always attach this share parameter. Okay, I'm going to load it back in. Yeah, override. All right, so now what you have is that you have a mark called its own thing. So you can say blah, blah, blah. All right, and then let's say I'm going to copy this, screw this door, and let's change this to 1 to 50. Okay. If this thing ever moves, there we go. Now, the other thing I forgot to mention is that, let's say for example, in certain scale you want to, let's say this is too big, I don't want to show it. You can always control it. So what you could do is that you could say, okay, for this tag, I do not want to show it at course level. Okay? And then you could say show the distance only if it's cut. You can also do the same thing. Okay? What it means by that is that if the door does not cut at a certain level, don't show that tag. But if it cuts at a certain level, it will show the tag. Okay? Simple as that. Next thing I forgot to do is that you go back here and make sure that it's, keep rotated and, make it readable. Okay? Flush. Okay, and then load it back into the project. All right, it's not cutting. Sometimes it disappears, so let's say connected. What is my cut? Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. There we go. All right, so that's how you change it, right? So let's say, for example, for 1 to 100, you always show coarse. You're not showing it. But let's say I'm going to change this to 1 to 50, and then the coarse becomes medium. Then yes, it starts to show. Okay.
So presumably there's the ability to control the visibility of that tag using filters as opposed to using the detail level, right?
Right. You can. Okay, so here's a trick. How you turn off that thing without changing that thing? You can always go to annotation. It falls under generic. Okay, turn that off. It's off. Okay, because that's the category that it belongs to.
And it could be on a subcategory of generic annotation. So if we had other generic annotations we wanted to keep on.
Right. Yeah, you could do that as well. So it's kind of like there's a couple tricks here and there, kind of a way. So, any questions so far? Do you see this potential use in a lot of your project? Yeah. I mean, I did this, back I think 2010, we run into this issue where a lot of users keeps modeling stuff. And what I find to be counterintuitive is that they would model the thing to be very exact, right? Let's say you have a floor, you want to dip it 4 inches below whatever, right? It was just a painful thing. And it just take one person to just say, oh, what I mean by that is that, this is how we used to do it in the past, is that we would model it and then we would add, let's say that's my thing, and then say, okay, change that and say this is -4 inches, right? Right, this is how we do it. But the problem with that is that it takes somebody very, very easily, just let's say I'm assuming that I have an annotation, like that, and then what happens that when someone do that, oh, that's it, it's gone, okay, and that becomes the problem. We run into that issue so many times. So this is the alternative you can use, right?
Just because you move the wall, it changes the floor?
Yeah, sometimes it does that, right? It's you cannot not control that. Now, if you want to get away, there's another trick you could do. Let's say, for example, if you want to keep that this particular object, what I typically recommend people doing is that draw a small circle. It doesn't have to be big. It could be let's say 100, okay? Just make it the size as the annotation, okay? And what you're going to do here is that you're going to annotate and say, okay, this is my, I'll just put a leader. I say that is my thing, okay? Just move it to that particular location, okay? Now you have a tag. Oh, let's delete that. All you have is that you have a little guy, and then you just have a tag. And what you could do is that you could copy that and paste it here. Okay, and then you can also do the same thing, constraints, and say, okay, I'm going to paste it there, and then this one I'm just going to say this one is -4 inches. So I'm just going to say -4 inches. Okay, when this thing gets deleted or someone reset this back, you notice that those information will not get deleted. Now, what you could do with this is that you could say, don't call it generic, call it sacrificial floor or something that is very, very small, right? So you could say, not generic, just say this is small potatoes guide, right? And then in here with the guide is that you could say, make it very thin. So let's say 1.5 millimeter, doesn't have to be very cute. And then in the filter, what you could do, I'm just going to create a floor. And I'm just going to call it guide. So for floor, you could go to model, family name. Yep, let's go to family name, equals. Oh, that's not good. Type name, that's what I want. Equals. Small potato guide. Okay, and within a small potato guide, what you could do is that you can make this thing very light, color, white, you don't see it, and you can see, use the dot. I usually use the dot, and then for the cut, I would just say, same thing, just make it so that they don't show up, right? Use a dot. Okay, you don't see it, but it's there. Okay, you can turn it off. The problem is that once you turn it off, let's say I don't know who that is. There you go. Like once you turn it off, it becomes turn off. Okay. So this is why I use the guide so that you can copy that information. Once you have that tag, you can always copy it around. Okay, this is very useful, especially if you're doing like if you're doing a lot of slab edges, right? So am I giving you guys ideas, good ideas, right? Because the thing is that for modeling, you try to avoid modeling and tag on it because if that thing ever change, you have to retag it, okay? So things to avoid is that you do not want to tag the major things. Just use the little things like this and then place that object on top of that. Whereas what you could do is that you could always use this object and then just do that calculated value and stuff like that, so this will always stick. Okay, a couple of tricks you can use. All right, that concludes today's session. Hopefully that does cover it. Hopefully you learned something. Yeah, just don't be afraid to let me know. The other thing you could do is that remember when you have like let's go back to Brecken. Okay, I'm going to delete this so that they don't see what the heck is it. In here, let's say for example, like this is a dishwasher or fridge and stuff like that. Same idea. So what you do is that you take that generic tag, generic annotation, and embed it into this. And what happens is that it will show an F or DW, or if you have a hot and cold, right? Perfect example. You can use that. All right. Hopefully that helps. And if you have like a rainwater leader, like all those tags, those like object stuff, instead of tagging it and saying that what it is, you could just embed it those information, and you don't have to retag that information again. Okay, so it's basically built into it. The other thing they'll talk about is that there's a fire extinguisher cabinet, same thing, annunciator panel. Like a lot of that stuff, I mean, you could put it in. Like in here, you don't see it, but annunciator panel, it's a perfect example. Like when you put it here, you want to see something, a tag, right? So why don't you build that tag into it so that you don't see it? You don't have to retag it. It just sits there. All right. Hopefully that helps. And if you have any question, Seattle, you have any question?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, good. All right, let's conclude our presentation. I'm going to have a recording probably shortly, probably Monday. And then I do have a write-up. I just have to update some of the documentations because I discovered some of this stuff while I was working away a couple of days ago. So I have to add that new information into it. All right, hopefully that helps you. If any questions, just let me know.